I hadn't set foot in New York in over 20 years. I didn't think I ever would again, and after what happened the night they turned their backs on me, discarded me like a stained napkin after a charity banquet. But there I was, standing in the gold and marble lobby of the Waldorf Astoria, wearing a faded gray coat, my boots scuffed and soles thinning. The air reeked of polished power and generational wealth. I kept my chin high, though I could feel the stares ripple across the room like heat off asphalt. And then I saw them. My mother, Vivian Reed, in her signature cream Chanel suit, pearls glowing against her neck like a noose made of money. My older brother, Miles, stood beside her, all tailored arrogance and square jaw, checking his Rolex like he was waiting for destiny to arrive and shake his hand. And Clara, now some kind of motivational author with a podcast called Forgive and Flex, holding a mimosa, smirking the same way she used to when she'd steal my sketchbooks and rip out the pages. They hadn't aged much, just hardened, like granite. Or maybe they'd always been stone and I was only now seeing clearly. "Excuse me, sir," came a voice from behind, "a hotel concierge." I stepped aside instinctively, letting a woman in a glittering black gown sweep past me. She didn't spare me a glance, neither did my family, until Vivian turned and froze. Her gaze landed on me like a blade. She blinked once, twice. Then she laughed. Not the warm kind, not even the cruel kind. The dismissive kind? The kind that erases you. "Is that—" Miles tilted his head. "Daniel?" Clara let out a tight little snort. "God, you look like you wandered in from the subway." Vivian's smile widened, her voice a cool blade of ice. "Did someone forget to lock the service entrance?" I didn't flinch. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times, but in every version they were either weeping apologies or clapping for my success. I hadn't accounted for this being treated like a stain on a Versace rug. "You shouldn't be here," Miles said, flatly stepping toward me. "This is a private event." "I'm a guest of the house," I replied equally flat. Miles raised an eyebrow. "Which house, the Salvation Army?" Clara chuckled into her mimosa. I looked around the room. The banquet hall beyond the glass doors buzzed with opulent satin chair covers, champagne towers, and men in navy suits whose cufflinks cost more than my month's rent. Everything gleamed with the polish of old money. Vivian crossed her arms. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish, Daniel? Make a scene? We're not in high school anymore." "I never went to the prom, remember," I answered. "You said I wasn't presentable." There was a flicker, just a flicker in her eyes. Regret? No. Recognition, maybe, that I still remembered everything. Before they could respond, a ripple of motion swept through the lobby. Hotel staff suddenly straightened their backs. The manager sprinted across the floor, whispering into a mic. Even the valet at the revolving door froze. Security detail entered first. Suits, earpieces moving with precision. Then came the figures that made the air shift. President Maxwell Grant. Taller than expected, wearing a charcoal suit that whispered silent command. Behind him, Prime Minister Calderón from Spain, flanked by her aides. And trailing them, the unmistakable silhouette of Charlotte DuPont, CEO of the largest defense tech firm in North America. Time slowed. My family's faces twisted in disbelief as President Grant walked directly, unquestionably to me. "Daniel," he said, a wide grin splitting his weathered face. "We didn't think you'd arrive this early." He clapped me on the shoulder like an old war buddy. "Still allergic to ties, I see." Clara's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble. The president turned to the others, gesturing. "This is the man I was telling you about, Daniel Reed, the architect behind the Omega Protocol." Charlotte DuPont stepped forward, hand extended. "Mr. Reed, I finally get to shake your hand." I took it, feeling her grip firm, her gaze calculating. Vivian made a noise. Not quite a gasp, more like a small dying animal realizing the trap it's in. Miles looked between me and the president, his mouth parting slightly. "Clara!" Well, Clara just stood there, mimosa dripping down her heels, speechless. "Sorry," I said, turning to the president. "They were just asking me to leave." Grant blinked, then glanced at my mother and siblings with measured coolness. "Is that right?" "No, Mr. President," Vivian cut in quickly. "Just a misunderstanding," I'm sure he said with the kind of voice that could level buildings. We walked together, the President DuPont and I, into the conference wing. Their chatter buzzed around me, but I barely heard it. My body was in autopilot. My mind... It was still anchored in the moment Clara dropped that glass. In Miles' jaw tightening. In my mother's eyes, how they darted around the room, calculating escape routes. They didn't know. They had no idea what I'd become. But they were about to find out. What none of them knew yet, not Vivian, not Miles, not Clara, was that this reunion wasn't accidental. I hadn't returned to New York for sentiment. I hadn't just stumbled into their party. I had planned this night for 2 years, and now it had begun. I wasn't always invisible to my family. In fact, once upon a time, I was their favorite project. The middle child, yes, but also the fixer, the one who smoothed things over, the one they paraded at fundraisers to prove how wholesome the Reeds were. Back then, we lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a white columned house on 5 acres with a backyard that felt like a private park. My father, Alan Reed, had just won his second term as a state senator. Vivian, my mother, ran 3 nonprofits on paper. In practice, she ran our image. Miles was the golden boy varsity tennis Ivy League bound from the cradle. Clara was the little darling with the rehearsed bows and perfect diction. And I was Daniel, the one who asked too many questions. It started with the inheritance. My grandfather, Walter Reed, not the one the hospital's named after, but a man just as commanding, passed away when I was 16. He'd built his fortune in naval engineering patented technologies the Pentagon still uses. And in his will, he left me something no one expected: 49% of the family's holding company. Not Miles, not Vivian. I still remember the silence around the dinner table when the lawyer read that line. My father's fork paused midair. Vivian's wineglass trembled just slightly. Miles was already red in the face. Surely that's a mistake, my mother had said, her tone too even. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Mr. Reed was very specific. He believed Daniel showed a different kind of intelligence, ethical, strategic, long-viewed. My father smiled like it was a photo op, but I could see the fury tucked behind his molars. From that moment, things changed. It started subtle, less eye contact, more backhanded compliments. Then came the isolation. My school laptop went missing for days at a time. Tutors were suddenly unavailable. My access to family meetings disappeared. I didn't understand it then, but I was being erased piece by piece under the illusion of discipline. Vivian called it tough love. She said, "We're preparing you for the real world, Daniel. Not everyone gets to inherit legacy without earning it." I wanted to believe her. I did. But then came the audit. At 18, right before heading to a small engineering college in Vermont, I was called into a family finance review. I didn't understand what I was signing, just that I had to keep the estate stable. I was told it was routine. What I actually signed was a temporary relinquishment of my voting rights on the board. Temporary, as in revocable only by board consensus, which of course Miles and Vivian controlled. I confronted them 2 days later, shaking, holding the documents. Miles smirked. "You should have read the fine print, little brother." Clara chimed in, "It's not personal, Danny, it's business." That night I left. Packed a duffel bag, drained what little I had left in my checking account, and disappeared. No confrontation, no theatrics, just silence. For 20 years they didn't contact me. No holidays, no birthdays. I followed them quietly from afar. Miles rose in the private equity world. Clara published 3 books on emotional resilience, and Vivian was honored with a humanitarian award at the Met Gala. Public image remained pristine. Behind the scenes, however, the Reed family was drowning in legal fees from fraud allegations they managed to hush with well-timed campaign donations. Meanwhile, I built a different life. I joined a think tank in DC, then transitioned to a cybersecurity lab. My mentor, George Talley, former NSA analyst, saw something in me. He pushed me toward a project that would eventually become Omega, a dynamic AI-driven protocol that protects intergovernmental communications against deep fake infiltration. The irony, my work protected people like my family. People who would have thrown me to wolves for press coverage. I never wanted revenge. Not really. I wanted truth. And when Omega was quietly acquired by the Department of Defense, I was given something more valuable than money or name recognition influence. Anonymous, but real. The kind that moves tides. So when I heard that Miles was hosting his engagement gala at the Waldorf the same day as the International Security Technology Summit held just 2 floors above, I requested a transfer. Quietly, officially. I'd be one of 6 technical advisors in the VIP protocol suite. That wasn't a coincidence, it was design. I'd studied them for years. I knew how Miles curled his lip when challenged, how Clara would blink rapidly when cornered. I knew Vivian's weakness, being caught off guard in public. So yes, my entrance in that lobby wasn't random. But what happened after, that was unscripted. I didn't expect President Grant to walk straight toward me like an old friend. I didn't expect Charlotte DuPont to publicly credit me with Omega. That wasn't planned. That was recognition. And it rattled them. Vivian had always told me respect isn't earned by brains, it's cultivated by presence. But that night, my presence said everything they had tried to erase. Still, this wasn't the climax. This was only the opening gambit. Because now, with the family shaken, came the moment to twist the knife, not out of vengeance, but exposure. A week before the gala, a whistleblower from the Reed Foundation had contacted me. An anonymous email sent through encrypted routing. The contents: financial statements, handwritten notes, a scanned signature mine on a series of suspicious transfers dated from my gap year, when I was supposedly abroad. Transfers that funneled funds into shell companies now under Miles's control. It was fraud, serious fraud, and my name was on the paperwork. I traced the signature. It wasn't mine. A forgery. Sloppy, but close enough to pass casual inspection. It would have ruined me if discovered earlier had I gone public, taken the spotlight. But I hadn't. I'd lived in the shadows. And now I had proof. And allies. Lucia Zhang, my college friend, now as senior legal advisor at the Department of Justice, had agreed to look into the documents. She was attending the same summit, and she had subpoena authority. So while I dined with dignitaries, toasted quietly with the president, my past was moving toward my family like a quiet tidal wave. And they had no idea. But they would. Very soon. I stepped into the security lounge on the 38th floor of the Waldorf, my credentials scanned twice, then verified by facial recognition. Inside it was a different universe from the glittering chaos downstairs. Dim lighting, heavy velvet curtains to muffle sound, 6 chairs arranged in a semicircle, 2 screens tracking real-time encrypted comms. And behind a frosted glass wall, the summit's secure command center where deals were whispered, alliances hinted at, and secrets protected. That was my realm now. Lucia was already waiting. She looked up from her tablet, sharp as ever, slick black bob-tailored navy suit eyes like she hadn't blinked since 2008. We hadn't seen each other in person in nearly 5 years, but she didn't waste a second on pleasantries. We confirmed the signature's a forgery, she said, flipping the screen toward me. Federal-level scrutiny confirmed. It's a synthetic overlay. Someone used a mimic algorithm layered on top of an old lease form you signed in Vermont. I stared at the screen. My own name stared back in ink I never touched. Who submitted the paperwork, I asked, though I already knew. Miles, through a proxy shell based in Delaware. Same structure was used to register 2 dummy nonprofits under the Reed Foundation umbrella. She paused. They funneled nearly $4 million across 3 years, all using your approval. I felt my jaw clench. The room shrank for a moment, not because I was surprised, but because I remembered the night it must have happened. Miles had visited me once unannounced back in 2007. Said he was worried about me. We'd had beers on the porch. I'd left to grab more from the fridge. My desk had been open, laptop logged in. Back then, I was still naive enough to believe blood held boundaries. Lucia was still talking. We traced the funds. Cayman route, of course, but there's enough to establish probable cause. I've filed a preliminary motion with Eastern District. Quietly. We don't want them running before the net closes. And Vivian, I asked? My voice came out flatter than I intended. Lucia hesitated, which told me everything. She's on the advisory board of 2 of the shell nonprofits. We can't prove she orchestrated it. Yet. But she's not clean. Of course not. Nothing about Vivian Reed had ever been clean, just obsessively polished. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles as if they held answers. You okay? Lucia asked softer now. I nodded slowly. Yeah, just realizing the only thing I ever inherited from my family was their ability to lie. There was a long pause. Then Lucia folded her hands. You know you could make this public. National-level coverage. Media would eat it up. Cybersecurity hero exposes elite family fraud. You'd have a public support, probably a documentary deal within a year. I shook my head. That's not what I want. I don't need their names ruined. I just want mine reclaimed. She studied me, then like always nodded once. Then we go surgical. Quiet, precise. The plan was simple. Wait 48 hours, let the DOJ's internal investigators finish assembling the financial web. Then serve subpoenas clean and public just as Miles was scheduled to finalize the merger with Stratus Capital, a $300 million deal that depended on Reed Foundation's reputation staying airtight. One subpoena and the whole thing would collapse. That night, I didn't go back to my hotel. I walked the streets instead, blending with the noise of New York like I had so many times before. Outside the plaza, I passed a mother and daughter eating pretzels on the curb. They were laughing. No cameras, no makeup. Just 2 people enjoying a moment. It was everything my childhood wasn't. I thought about my father. Alan Reed had been a man of contradictions, stern in public, warmer behind closed doors. He died just 3 months after I left home. Heart attack, they said, but I always felt something deeper. I remembered how he used to stare out the window late at night, hands tucked behind his back. The weight of what he knew, what he tolerated, must have been unbearable. I suspected now that he'd tried to protect me by putting my name on that 40 kid. Maybe it was his final rebellion against Vivian. Or maybe it was guilt. Either way, that 49% was my tether, my anchor. And soon it would be my leverage. The next morning, I arrived early at the DOJ satellite office where Lucia handed me a sealed envelope. You've got 2 options, she said. We serve them ourselves, or you hand-deliver it, in front of witnesses. Maximum impact. I didn't hesitate. Later that afternoon, I stood outside the gala ballroom again. The lights inside were dimmed for a keynote address by Isles himself. Through the double doors, I could hear him saying something about legacy and integrity. The irony almost made me laugh. I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The room turned. Miles froze mid-sentence. Clara was at the front table, seated next to a hedge fund titan. Vivian sat across the room, pearls gleaming like she'd bled for them. I walked straight down the aisle toward the stage. My boots echoed against marble. Miles blinked disoriented. "Daniel, what the hell are you?" "Delivering something," I said, pulling the envelope from my coat. I held it up. The DOJ seal gleamed under the stage lights. Clara gasped. Vivian stood slowly, hands braced on the edge of the table. I handed it to Miles. "This is a courtesy," I said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Next time it won't be in private." Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, I could hear the murmurs begin. And just as I reached the doors, a voice cold cracked called out, "Daniel." I stopped. Vivian's voice. I turned halfway, not quite facing her. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes looked afraid. "You don't know what you've done," she said. I smiled. "Oh, I know exactly what I've done." Vivian didn't follow me out of the ballroom, but I felt her stare burning into my back like a branding iron. I didn't look back again. There was no satisfaction in that moment, only a sense of gravity shifting. Something old and rotten was cracking open, and the stench was finally out in the open. Miles now had a federal subpoena with his name on it, and Clara couldn't keep playing the part of the self-help queen while her podcast empire sat on laundered money. But Vivian, she was different. She wouldn't go down quietly. She never did. Back upstairs in the Summit's private quarters, Lucia briefed me. "We've scheduled testimony. The district attorney's team wants a private statement from you tomorrow. They're already moving on the banks." I nodded, watching the city blur past the window. "And Miles?" I asked. "Lawyers already reached out," she said. "Panicked, trying to negotiate early immunity. But the feds aren't biting. They know he's just one head of the Hydra." That night, I sat alone in my hotel suite staring at an untouched glass of bourbon. New York was a hive of lights outside, glowing like a fake constellation. I felt nothing. No vindication, no triumph, just a strange quiet. 20 years I'd lived with that family's silence in my lungs like a weight. Now that it was lifting, I didn't feel free. I felt exposed. When the phone buzzed, I almost didn't answer. The screen said unknown, but instinct made me pick up. "Daniel." Her voice was strained, tired, older. "It's Mom." I didn't say anything. "I know you're angry," she continued, "but there are things you don't understand. Your father, he made mistakes too. We all did. I need to see you." I closed my eyes, leaned back against the wall. "Now you want to talk?" "There's something you need to hear," she said quietly. "Before this gets worse." And she hung up. The next morning, I met her in Central Park. She chose a bench near the Alice in Wonderland statue. Children giggled nearby. Vivian Reed, once a symbol of cold control, now sat hunched, gloved hands twisting in her lap. Her pearl earrings still gleamed, but her eyes were heavy. "I didn't know about the full extent of it," she said, not looking at me. Not at first. I waited. "Miles was the one who pushed for your voting rights to be suspended. He said it was for the good of the company. That you were too young, that you'd burn through the assets." She swallowed hard. I believed him. "You didn't just believe him," I said. "You helped him." Vivian finally turned to me. Her eyes glistened. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if you kept control, your father would choose you to run the foundation, not Miles. Alan saw something in you that scared him. You reminded him too much of himself." I blinked. "Dad didn't trust me either." "No," she whispered. "He trusted you too much. That's what scared him. Because you could see through the games." I stood the park, buzzing with the life we never had. "You want forgiveness?" "No," she said softly. "I want you to understand that we all betrayed you, but I didn't know about the signature. About the shell companies, I swear. I believed her and didn't. Vivian was many things, but careless wasn't one of them." Back at the DOJ office, Lucia confirmed that new evidence had come in anonymous files dumped from an offshore server. It included voice recordings, Miles in conversation with their family attorney. "Just copy Daniel's Vermont lease and rework the signature he said on one of the tapes. He won't even notice." Kids halfway off the grid. That was the final nail. But something else was hidden in those files. A buried document from the Foundation's old archives dated 2 months before my father's death. A letter. Not addressed to me, but about me. It was a resignation draft, Alan Reed stepping down from the board, proposing to hand over the 49% stake to me in full, including voting power. The note in the margin said, "Daniel's the only one who sees the rot. He's the only one who might fix it." The letter was never sent. 3 weeks later, he was dead. Heart attack, they said, but now I wasn't so sure. The deeper I looked, the more patterns emerged. Payments made to Dr. Horowitz, the family physician. Private meetings logged between Miles and the Foundation's CFO days before Alan's death. The autopsy report had been sealed. I turned to Lucia, throat dry. Can we reopen that file? She didn't answer immediately. We can try, but you need to be ready, Daniel. If you start pulling on this thread, it might not stop at Miles. It might unravel everything, even your father's memory. I stared at the screen again. My name, my father's signature, my family's mask cracking piece by piece. I want the truth, I said. Lucia exhaled. Then we dig. It started with one name, Dr. Samuel Horowitz, the family physician close friend to my father, godparent to Clara's firstborn. He'd signed the autopsy report. Sealed it, in fact, under the guise of privacy for the grieving family. For years, I never questioned it. Heart attacks happened, my father was under pressure, but now with the letter he never sent and the timing of Miles's sudden ascension into full financial control, the puzzle looked different. Less like a tragedy, more like a setup. Lucia made some calls. Within 24 hours, the DOJ filed a formal petition to unseal the death certificate and accompanying toxicology. It would take days, weeks maybe, for it to move through official channels, but I wasn't planning to wait. I needed a conversation. Not with Miles, with Dr. Horowitz himself. He still lived on the Upper East Side, tucked away in a red brick building near Carl Schurz Park. I showed up just before sundown wearing my old Vermont parka. The security guard barely glanced at me as I walked in. I knew the layout. I'd been there for annual checkups as a kid, watched the same aquarium in the waiting room filled with the same bored fish. The door opened slowly. Horowitz stood in slacks and a cashmere sweater, gray hair, neatly parted, expression tight. Daniel, he said, no warmth, just control. Doctor, I nodded once, we need to talk. He didn't move to let me in. I didn't wait for the invitation. I stepped inside. The apartment smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Classical music hummed low from somewhere. I turned to face him. Why was my father's report sealed? His jaw flexed. Because your mother requested it. She's not a doctor, you are. And I honored the family's wishes. Or Miles paid you to keep it buried. He didn't flinch, but he didn't deny it either. I stepped closer. You signed off on a cardiac event, but the toxicology screening was delayed 6 hours after death. That's not protocol. You don't understand the pressure we were under. That was enough, so there was something to hide. He turned away, walked slowly to a glass decanter and poured himself scotch. His hand trembled. There was digitalis in his system, unprescribed. The dose wasn't high enough to guarantee death, but combined with his beta blockers, it was a fatal cocktail. I stood still. The room seemed smaller now. Who gave it to him, I asked. I don't know, Horowitz said quietly. All I know is the night before he died, Alan called me. Said he wasn't feeling right. That he thought someone had tampered with his meds. He sounded scared. And you didn't report that. He turned sharply. You think I didn't want to? I was going to. But the next morning, he was dead. Vivian called, said it was a peaceful passing. Miles was already drafting the public statement. My stomach tightened. And you just went along with it. I had no choice, he said, the glass now shaking in his hand. They threatened to expose an old malpractice settlement from my residency. Said it would ruin my license, my family. I stared at him. My voice came out low. You helped cover up my father's murder. No. His voice cracked. I helped delay justice. I know that now. I left without another word. That night, Lucia and I sat in a windowless briefing room combing through the implications. This is bigger than financial fraud, she said. We're moving into criminal conspiracy. If your father's death is officially reopened as suspicious, it elevates everything. I nodded slowly, and Miles, still silent. But rumor has it he's lawyering up hard. My phone buzzed, then an encrypted message, no sender. Just a string of characters and a link. Lucia leaned in. What is it? I copied it into a secure viewer. It was a video, a grainy clip from a hotel surveillance feed. Date stamped 2 nights ago, just after I served Miles the subpoena. The video showed Miles entering a suite at the Waldorf. Inside waited a man I didn't recognize at first, tall, dark suit, foreign posture. Then another figure stepped into frame. Clara. My heart stopped. In the video, Miles handed the mystery man a silver briefcase. Clara stood nearby, arms crossed. There was no sound, but her lips were moving, deliberate, rehearsed. She nodded once. The man took the case, then all 3 exited the frame together. What the hell is this? Lucia whispered. I replayed it twice, and on the 3rd watch I saw it. The man, Middle Eastern features tall, was on a current State Department watch list. Suspected of funneling insider tech contracts out of U.S. security systems. Lucia's voice turned cold. Daniel, they're selling your Omega protocol. And just like that, I realized the real plan was never just to erase me from the family. They wanted to sell the future I built. The room felt colder after the video ended, like even the air knew something irreversible had just surfaced. Lucia sat rigid beside me, her fingers locked tight around her tablet. Neither of us spoke for a long minute. The man in the video was Amir Bahmani, flagged in 3 different countries for digital espionage. I'd read his name before, buried in national security briefs, always tied to quiet corruption, never anything proven. Now he was on camera with my brother and sister, taking what looked like payment for a weaponized version of Omega. The betrayal burned sharper than anything that came before. They weren't just trying to erase me, they were trying to hijack what I'd built to protect this country. Lucia broke the silence. If that code got out... She didn't need to finish. We both knew. Omega wasn't a physical device, it was an AI-based infrastructure tool that, if manipulated, could silently redirect intelligence, mimic high-level communications, and make enemy states look like allies. It was powerful, and dangerous in the wrong hands. I need to know how much they took, I said. Lucia already had her phone out. We'll run an integrity audit through your access logs. If there's been a breach, the DOJ needs to lock it down immediately. While she worked, I stared at the wall. My mind raced through every conversation I'd had with Clara since reconnecting. Every vague statement, every sudden warmth, every too-perfect apology. I wanted to believe she'd changed. I'd wanted a sister again. But Clara never did anything without a script. The results came back 15 minutes later. Lucia's voice was tense. They accessed the sandbox environment last week under an alias tied to a consultant badge you approved. It was embedded in the Waldorf network. Whoever it was cloned portions of the predictive response module. That's the backbone of Omega, I muttered. Lucia nodded grimly. Not the full system, but enough to reverse engineer functions, especially if they've got the right analysts. My breath caught in my throat. So what now? She looked me dead in the eye. Now we go to the president. That night, under federal escort, I was rushed to a secure location in Foggy Bottom. President Grant was already waiting. No suits, no press, just him. 2 intelligence chiefs, and the weight of knowing the world had shifted in the last 12 hours. I explained everything. From the forged signature to the subpoena, from the suspicious death of my father to the surveillance footage. No detail was left behind. When I finished, the president was quiet. His hands were steepled beneath his chin. Finally, he spoke. You understand what this means, Daniel? I do. If even a partial Omega model ends up in enemy hands, we're looking at a global destabilization scenario. You built the firewall. Now I need you to shut the gates. I can do it, I said, more certain than I felt. But it can't come from me, the president said. We can't go public yet. Not without proof of export. We need bait. Lucia looked at me. You're the bait. I nodded. Let them think they have won. Let them think I'm retreating. For the next 36 hours, we did nothing publicly. But behind the scenes, we traced Bahmani's network, monitored Clara and Miles, and planted markers into the cloned Omega files, tiny pieces of self-reporting code that would flag any future unauthorized use. On day 3, it happened. Bahmani's network pinged from Istanbul. The code was alive, active. It was enough. International warrants were filed. Interpol picked up Bahmani in a private lounge at Ataturk Airport less than an hour before he boarded a private jet to Dubai. He was carrying an encrypted flash drive and a burner phone with 2 saved numbers. One was an unregistered device tied to Miles. The other was Clara's personal line. News spread fast. Within hours, media picked up whispers of a high-level breach involving Omega. Clara's podcast empire was placed under audit. Miles's merger collapsed overnight. Vivian stayed silent, but something still gnawed at me. This wasn't just business. This was personal. My father had died under suspicious circumstances. Bahmani had almost walked away with my life's work, and someone still had to answer for the cover-up. Which led me to the last person I hadn't confronted, Clara. I found her alone in a townhouse in Soho. She looked tired, wrapped in a designer shawl that did nothing to hide her shaking hands. When she opened the door, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, Fear. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. You gave Bahmani access, I said. You smiled in his face while selling out your own country. Her voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to go that far. You helped frame me, helped push our father out, and now you're claiming surprise. Tears welled up. I didn't know Miles would... Don't you dare make him the scapegoat, I snapped. You were in that room. You handed him the drive. I needed the money, she said. The foundation's bleeding. Our lifestyle, it's a house of cards. Vivian was going to lose everything. Miles said this would be quick. Quiet. And my life was collateral. Her eyes dropped. I stepped closer. You're going to testify? You're going to give the DOJ everything? Or you'll spend the rest of your life watching the inside of a prison cell? She said nothing, just nodded. As I turned to leave, she whispered, they weren't done. I froze. She looked up. Bahmani wasn't the only buyer. Clara's words echoed in my head as I stepped into the cold night air. They weren't the only buyer. I'd thought the storm had passed. That bringing Bahmani down was the end of the game. But that whisper, half confession, half warning, told me otherwise. And I knew Clara well enough to recognize when she was telling the truth. She wasn't built for long games. She cracked under pressure, which meant the real danger was still out there. By sunrise, Lucia and I were back in Washington. The DOJ had moved fast. With Clara's partial testimony and metadata from Bahmani's confiscated devices, we traced the leak further to a closed-door meeting between Miles and a shadow consortium. Former tech magnates, rogue investors, and one particularly familiar name, Senator Prescott, a known hawk and public enemy of the Omega Protocol from day one. Turned out he wasn't just against it ideologically, he wanted to control it privately. They'd all been planning to split the system, rebrand it as Next Secure, and pitch it to foreign governments as a consulting service. High-level security wrapped in capitalist disguise, my life's work mutated into a global black market tool. I'd built Omega to protect free societies, and now these men were about to sell it to the highest bidder like it was a piece of real estate. I was done playing quiet. We called a press conference. No podium, no spin doctors, just me, Lucia, and a flash drive. I walked up to the mic, stared out into a sea of reporters, lenses, and lights. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. My name is Daniel Reed. I was erased by my family. Lied about? And now I'm standing here because I refuse to stay erased. I played the footage, Miles handing over the briefcase, Clara's silent nod, the call logs, the money trails, even the forged documents tying them to my father's suspicious death. And this, I said, holding up the drive as the last clean version of Omega. It's now in the hands of the Department of Defense under permanent federal stewardship. No private entity will ever own or corrupt it again. Questions exploded around me, but I only answered one. Why now, a journalist asked. I looked straight at the camera. Because legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you protect. Within days, the story dominated every headline. The Reed family scandal was no longer just about wealth or betrayal. It became a national conversation about morality and tech, about privilege and accountability, about what happens when we let power run unchecked behind closed doors. Miles was indicted. Clara, under a plea deal, gave full cooperation and vanished from public life. Vivian never showed her face again. Her empire of charities folded one by one. The First Lady of Philanthropy, now just another line in a cautionary tale. But the biggest twist. Weeks later, a private investigator quietly confirmed something chilling. Alan Reed's death certificate had indeed been tampered with. The autopsy report had a second version never filed listing his cause of death as inconclusive. Dr. Horowitz disappeared the night that revelation came out. His Manhattan apartment cleared out, phone disconnected. No one's heard from him since. I didn't celebrate. I stood on my father's old porch in Connecticut one last time, watching the trees sway like ghosts whispering secrets. I didn't need revenge. I'd already won. What I needed was peace. And that came not from punishing them, but from reclaiming what they tried to steal: my name, my voice, and the truth. I rebuilt Omega not as a tool of control, but a platform for protection, transparency, and public good. Open source community governed, audited annually. Not perfect, but real. And every time someone asks me how I survived, I tell them that don't chase validation from people addicted to their own reflections. Build your mirror. Make it bulletproof. Let the world see who you are before they tell you who to be. But here's the question that still keeps me up some nights. If you found out your family had betrayed you to protect their power, would you destroy them to save the world, or would you walk away knowing that justice might cost more than your soul can afford? Drop your thoughts below. There's no easy answer. But I'll be reading. Story 2. My name is Liam Carter, and my life took a wild turn the day my mom emptied my college fund to save my stepbrother's failing business. You'd think the shock of seeing your entire future vanish in a blink would dull over time. Nope, 3 years later, the wound still burned like salt on an open cut. But let's rewind a bit, because to fully grasp the betrayal, you need to know the promise that started it all. When I was 9, my father Andrew lay on a hospital bed battling leukemia. He had always been my superhero, and even while hooked to machines, his presence dominated the room. 2 days before he died, Dad handed me a worn blue notebook, whispering, "Liam, this is your ticket out. $20,000 for your education. Protect it." At that moment, I didn't comprehend the weight of his words or the magnitude of that promise. I just knew that Dad had trusted me with something special, something sacred. Dad passed, and Mom Melanie did her best to uphold that promise. Every birthday, Christmas, and even random Sundays, she contributed a little more. By the time I was 16, the account was hovering near 50,000. We had a routine. She'd show me the balance, and we'd dream about the universities I'd attend. Then came Trevor Ellis, my stepfather. Mom remarried when I was 17. Trevor was a charmer, the type of guy who never quite made it big, but acted like he owned the world. He brought his son Brad, who was 19, and convinced he was destined for greatness. Brad's latest venture, a trendy sneaker resale shop that never seemed busy, yet he always had new gadgets and flashy clothes. Brad saw himself as an entrepreneur, I saw him as entitled. Things changed fast after the marriage. Trevor's influence crept into our home like mold behind walls unnoticed until it was too late. Suddenly, Mom's conversations about my future became quieter, shorter, evasive. "We'll discuss it later," she'd mumble, avoiding my eyes. I felt a storm brewing, but nothing prepared me for what was about to happen. It was a chilly March evening when I stumbled upon the truth. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when Mom and Trevor entered, arguing in whispers that grew louder. "He needs this, Melanie," Trevor pressed his voice edgy. "But it's Liam's college fund," Mom protested weakly. "Brad's shop will take off, it's temporary. We'll put it all back soon enough." Trevor insisted with the false confidence that had charmed my mom into submission. My stomach sank as reality crashed into me. I slammed my textbook shut. "What's going on?" My voice trembled, demanding answers. Mom's face went pale. Trevor stared at me defiantly. "We're making a family decision. Brad's business needs a loan. You should be supportive, Liam." "That's my future, Dad. Save that money for me, Mom!" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. Mom looked away, guilt etched deep in her eyes, but Trevor stepped forward, smug. "Family shares everything, Liam. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made." I stormed out, the cold air biting my face. My future evaporated overnight, stolen by Trevor and his delusions of grandeur, enabled by my mom's betrayal. That night, lying awake, anger crystallized into resolve. I wouldn't be their victim. I'd rebuild on my own terms. 2 weeks later, I moved in with my Uncle Greg, Dad's older brother. Greg was straightforward, a mechanic who understood the value of sweat and dignity. His tiny house felt more like home than the mansion I'd left behind. I found a part-time job at a local computer repair shop and immersed myself in studies and work fueled by a quiet fury. The years passed quickly, yet the sting lingered. I'd just started college, funding my own way through scholarships and endless hours repairing tech, when an unexpected call shattered my fragile peace. My phone buzzed, Mom's number flashing on screen. "Liam, please," she begged immediately, voice desperate, shaken. "Trevor left. Brad's in jail. I need you." For 3 years, I'd rehearsed this moment in my head, imagining triumph or scornful rejection. Yet hearing her voice, now raw and frightened, threw me off balance. I wanted to scream, remind her of the promise she broke. But another part of me hesitated, remembering who she used to be before Trevor. "Mom?" I finally said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Why should I come back after everything?" Her sobs cut deep. "Because I was wrong, Liam. I'm so sorry I betrayed you. You're the only family I have left." My grip tightened on the phone, memories flashing, the notebook, Dad's dying eyes, Trevor's smug smile. She sounded genuine, but trust wasn't something I had left to spare. "I'll think about it," I muttered before hanging up. That night, sleep eluded me. I'd spent 3 years crafting my independence, my identity separate from their drama. Yet my mother's plea reopened wounds I believed healed. Could forgiveness exist after betrayal this deep? Little did I know confronting the past would become my greatest battle, yet revealing truths darker than I ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, memories pushed through, the sharp crack of Trevor's voice, the way Mom's eyes avoided mine, and the sound of the front door slamming behind me the day I left. Uncle Greg made pancakes the next morning like he always did on Sundays. He didn't say anything when he slid the plate in front of me, just raised an eyebrow the way he did when he knew something was up but didn't want to push. I appreciated that about him. He let you speak when you were ready. I took a bite, then finally said it. She called. His fork paused midair. "Your mom." I nodded. "What's she want?" I hesitated. "Says Trevor's gone. Brad's in jail. She's alone. Wants to talk." Greg let out a long sigh, the kind that carried more weight than words ever could. "That woman made her bed, Liam. Don't go throwing your spine away trying to fluff her pillow." That hit harder than I expected. Greg had always been quiet about what went down, never badmouthed my mom outright. But I guess even he had limits. "She sounded different," I said quietly. People always sound different when life stops going their way. That sat between us like a fog. I didn't know what I wanted from my mother, closure maybe, or just an apology that didn't come too late. Still, something inside me needed to see the wreckage for myself. Not because I wanted to fix it, I just needed to know how far they'd fallen. 2 days later, I stood outside the house I'd once called home. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was peeling and lawn overgrown, and the porch light flickered like it was struggling to stay alive. I didn't knock, I just walked in. She was sitting on the couch, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, like it was the last thing keeping her grounded. When she looked up and saw me, something flickered in her eyes. Relief, regret, maybe both. Regret. "Liam," she said, like tasting the name after years of silence. I didn't sit. I leaned against the doorway and arms crossed. "You said Trevor left." She nodded. 6 months ago. Took whatever was left of our savings and vanished. No note, just gone. And Brad, she looked down. Fraud charges, fake invoices, got greedy. He's serving 2 years. I wanted to say you surprised, but it felt pointless. She placed the mug down, her hands shaking. I know what I did. I can't take it back. But you have every right to hate me. Hate was easy. Indifference harder. What I felt was something in between a gnawing disappointment tangled with the faintest thread of pity. I don't hate you, I said, surprising even myself. But I can't forget. You chose them over me. You watched everything Dad saved for me vanish for what? A sneaker store. She winced. It wasn't supposed to go like that. I believed in Brad. I thought I was doing what a good mother should, supporting her family. Except you forgot who your family was. Silence. Then she whispered, I forgot myself, Liam. Somewhere along the way I stopped being your mom and started being someone else's shadow. I didn't respond. Her words were honest, but honesty wasn't enough. Not after the years I spent clawing my way out of the hole she helped dig. I didn't ask you to come back to fix things, she continued. I know I don't deserve that, but I had to try. Had to face you. I've been living in this house with nothing but ghosts. Her voice cracked, and for a moment I saw the woman she used to be. The one who used to sit beside me with Dad's notebook dreaming about Stanford and MIT. Do you know what Brad told me when he got arrested? She asked, wiping her eyes. He said it was all my fault. That I enabled him. That I raised him to believe he was special, untouchable. I wasn't surprised. Brad had always blamed the world for his failures. But he wasn't wrong, she added. I did that. I let him believe he could take anything without earning it. And you, I made you pay the price. I looked around. The house was crumbling, not just the walls, but the energy. It was hollow, a monument to bad decisions. I rebuilt my life, Mom, I said. With Greg's help? With my own damn hands? You don't get to pull me back into this mess just because you're lonely. I know, she said. I just needed you to know that I see it now. All of it. And I'm sorry. I didn't answer. I didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something about her expression, raw, exhausted, stripped of the delusions she used to cling to, made me stay a little longer. That night I told Greg everything. He didn't gloat, didn't say I told you so. Just nodded slowly. She lost herself trying to hold on to something that was never real, he said. And you found yourself because you had nothing to lose. That stuck with me, because he was right. Losing everything forced me to build something stronger. But the past has a way of clawing back even when you think you've outrun it. The next day, I got a call from someone I never expected. Hey, it's Emily, the voice on the other end said. I blinked. Emily. Brad's ex. We met once at his graduation party. Vaguely, I remembered her quiet, observant, the only person in that house who didn't worship the ground he walked on. I know this is weird, she continued. But we need to talk. About Brad. And your mom. There's something you should see. My gut twisted. What kind of something? She paused. Something that might change everything you think you know. And just like that, the past I thought I'd left behind was knocking again this time with secrets still buried, waiting to be unearthed. I met Emily 2 days later at a quiet coffee shop tucked between a closed bookstore and an old tailor's shop on the east side of town. She looked older than I remembered, not in a worn-out way, more like someone who had seen too much too fast and came out the other side, colder, sharper. We ordered tea, sat by the window, and for a minute neither of us spoke. Then she reached into her coat and slid a manila envelope across the table toward me. What's this? I asked, my fingers hovering over it. Evidence, she said. You deserve to know what really happened with your college fund. What your mother told you wasn't the full truth. I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of bank statements, transaction records, and a few emails. My name was there, listed on the original college savings account. But something new stood out, an early withdrawal made months before Brad ever launched his business. Thousands gone. Transferred into a joint account shared between Trevor and my mother. Not Brad. Emily watched my expression darken. Brad wasn't the one who emptied your fund. He didn't even know it existed until after it was gone. What are you saying? My voice was low cold. I'm saying Trevor used your college money to clear his own debts. Gambling, failed investments. Your mom agreed thinking they'd pay it back. Then Brad came up with the sneaker store idea and they used that as a cover. I felt like the ground tilted beneath me. It wasn't just betrayal, it was betrayal built on a lie. Brad's store wasn't the beginning, she continued. It was the distraction. They let you hate him because it was easier than admitting the truth. I clenched my fists under the table, teeth grinding. Why are you telling me this now? Emily sipped her tea, then met my eyes. Because I'm tired of carrying their secrets, and because Brad, he changed in jail. He asked me to tell you. Said he owed you the truth, even if it came from me. I sat back trying to breathe. My whole life I'd blamed Brad. Built my anger around the idea that he was the thief, the golden boy who stole my future. And now he was just a pawn too. I didn't know if I felt vindicated or sick. I confronted your mom once, Emily added. Last year, she begged me not to tell you. Said she couldn't lose you forever, but she already hadn't she? I nodded slowly. The pieces were falling into place, but they didn't make me feel whole. They made me realize just how deep the rot ran. I spent that night staring at the ceiling in Greg's guest room, the folder resting on my chest like a weight I couldn't throw off. The lies weren't new, but their shape had shifted, become more insidious. Trevor hadn't just manipulated my mom, he'd reshaped the truth so thoroughly that even I had played into it. Greg knocked once before pushing the door open, holding 2 beers. "You look like someone just told you gravity's fake," he said, handing me a bottle. I think I hate her more now than I did before, I muttered. He sat down on the floor near the bed. "That's fair. Truth can feel worse than betrayal sometimes, especially when it makes you question your own memories. I spent years blaming Brad. Because they let you. That's what cowards do. They hide behind convenient villain." I rubbed my eyes. And now what? What am I supposed to do with this? "That depends," Greg said, taking a sip. "You want revenge, closure, justice, or just peace?" I didn't know. All I knew was that this lie they fed me was too big to swallow and too poisonous to ignore. A week later, I showed up at my mother's house again. No warning, just the folder under my arm and a storm in my chest. She opened the door, surprised to see me twice in the same month. "Liam, don't I said," stepping past her. "Sit down." She hesitated but followed. I dropped the envelope onto the table between us. "Want to explain why you let me believe Brad ruined my life when it was you and Trevor all along?" Her face drained of color. I thought... "You thought lying would be easier for you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I had no sympathy left, not this time. "You let me walk away hating my stepbrother. You watched me struggle, watched me claw my way through life while you kept this secret." "I was scared," she whispered. "Scared of losing the only person I had left. You lost me the day you chose him over Dad. Over me." Silence, heavy, suffocating silence. "Trevor's gone. You could have told me the truth." "I was ashamed, Liam. I still am." "Then live with it," I said. "Own it. But don't expect me to clean up the mess." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. For the first time, she looked like she understood how far she'd pushed me. There was no comfort to offer. No apology that could bridge this gap. "I'm not coming back," I told her. "And I don't want anything from you. But you're going to tell the truth to the family, to Greg, to Brad, if you haven't already. You're going to stop rewriting history." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Okay. Not for me," I added. "For Dad. He didn't die for this." And with that, I left. The air outside hit like a slap, cold and sharp, but it was honest. I breathed it in like I hadn't in years. 2 months later, I received a letter. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a note in Brad's handwriting. "Liam, I owe you more than I can ever repay. I didn't know back then. I should have questioned it, but I was too busy being selfish. Emily told me she gave you the truth. I'm sorry for everything, even the things I didn't do. I'm getting out early for good behavior. I don't expect anything, but if you ever want to talk, I'll be in Denver with my aunt. No pressure, just thank you for not hating me forever. Brad." I read it 3 times, folded it, then tucked it in Dad's old notebook, the one he gave me when I was 9. I kept it with me all these years, though I hadn't opened it in a long time. Now I did. Inside was his last note to me, written in the margin of the last page. "Liam, if you ever find yourself lost, remember, your future doesn't belong to anyone else. Not even me. Build it with your own hands, and never let fear write your story." Dad, I closed the notebook heart steady for the first time in a long while. The lies had been uncovered, the damage irreversible, but in their place there was finally room for something honest. Not forgiveness, maybe, but freedom. It was strange how silence could become your companion after chaos. After all the yelling lies and tears, I found myself back in Greg's garage, elbows deep in an old Pontiac's engine, letting the hum of tools and the scent of oil do the talking. There was something therapeutic in fixing something that had broken. Machines didn't lie. When they failed, they told you exactly where. Humans, not so much. Brad's letter stayed in my desk drawer. I hadn't written back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what I'd say. "Sorry, too much had happened. I forgive you, that felt dishonest." The truth was, I didn't hate him anymore. But I also didn't owe him peace. What I did owe myself was space, mental, emotional, physical. So I poured my energy into finishing college, working late shifts, and ignoring the hole in my chest that used to ache every time I thought about my mom. One afternoon, I found Greg sitting on the back porch, sipping his usual late-day coffee, staring off into the trees like they had secrets to tell. I sat beside him, the wooden steps creaking under our weight. "You look less angry lately," he said without looking at me. "I think I ran out of it," I replied, and meant it. Greg smiled. "Good. Anger's like fire. Keeps you warm at first, then burns you alive if you're not careful." He was right. I had let that fire carry me through the darkest times, but it had no place in the life I was trying to build. I'd survived the worst. Now I had to figure out how to live past it. A few weeks later, I was asked to speak at a scholarship fundraiser hosted by the local tech nonprofit I interned with. It wasn't a big event, mostly donors and a few community leaders, but they wanted someone who understood the struggle. Someone who'd clawed their way up. I almost said no. What would I say? That my mom drained my college fund and my stepfather vanished like smoke after a fire, that I'd spent years hating a boy who didn't even know he was a scapegoat. But Greg nudged me. You don't owe them the ugly version, but you can give them the real one. So I wrote a speech, rewrote it 10 times, then threw it out and started again, this time from the heart. When the night came, I stood under dim lights in a church-turned-community hall holding a worn copy of Dad's notebook. My voice trembled at first, but then steadied as I found the rhythm, like walking on a path I'd carved with my own 2 feet. I was 9 when my father gave me this, I said, lifting the notebook. He told me it was my future. A college fund he started the day I was born. He died 2 days later. But his promise lived on until it didn't. I paused, letting that hang. Life threw curveballs. People I trusted made choices I couldn't control. But here's what I've learned. You are not what they take from you. You are what you build after. The applause was quiet, respectful. But I didn't need validation. I had already reclaimed something far more important, my voice. The next morning, I got a message on LinkedIn from a woman named Nora Jensen. She introduced herself as a program director at a startup accelerator in Denver. Said she'd seen my speech on YouTube. Turns out someone from the nonprofit uploaded it. She liked what she heard. Wanted to know if I'd be open to an interview. They had a community innovation fellowship focused on social impact tech. It was competitive, sure, but she believed I had a story and a mind they couldn't ignore. At first, I thought it was a scam. But after checking her credentials, digging into the program, and even calling a former fellow, I realized it was legit. The kicker, the program was based 15 minutes outside of where Brad had said he'd be. Life, huh? Greg was the first person I told. He sat there wiping grease off his hands with a rag that used to be a t-shirt. You gonna go? I think I have to, I said. He nodded. Then you go? Don't let ghosts keep you stuck. I packed a week later. Said goodbye to the garage, to the quiet dinners, to the makeshift family that saved me. Greg didn't say much, but when I was loading the car, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo of me and my dad, one I'd never seen before. We were on the front steps of our old house. I was maybe 5, beaming as he tied my shoes. Found it in an old box, Greg said. Figured it was time. I hugged him tighter than I ever had. Thank you for everything. Just make us proud. I already am, I whispered and meant it. Denver felt like a clean slate. The fellowship housed me in a modest apartment with shared workspaces and mentorship sessions twice a week. I met people from all over, designers, coders, educators, all of them driven by a desire to fix something broken in the world. In that space, I thrived. I pitched a project aimed at helping underserved teens navigate college funding, complete with digital tools for transparency and security. A kind of vault protected by smart contracts and accountability tracking. I called it Promise after my dad's last word to me. The mentors loved it. The fellows rallied behind it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was leading. Then on a rainy Wednesday, I walked into the co-working lounge and froze. Brad, he was there. Not just passing through, sitting at a table talking to a woman I assumed was a mentor, gesturing to a laptop. He looked different, less polished, more grounded. He glanced up. Our eyes locked. Neither of us moved. A minute passed before he stood and walked over. He stopped a few feet away, unsure. Liam, he said, voice softer than I remembered. I didn't know you were here. I shrugged. I didn't come for you. I figured. An awkward pause. I saw the video, the speech, he said. It was powerful. Glad someone got something from it. He exhaled slowly. Listen, I know I have no right to ask, but can we talk, not now maybe, but someday? I studied him. He wasn't the cocky kid anymore. There was no arrogance in his voice, just humility and maybe finally understanding. Maybe I said, not today. That's fair. He turned to leave, then paused. I'm proud of you, you know, even if I don't get to say it again. And just like that, he was gone. But something in me had shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a crack in the wall. And sometimes that's all it takes for the light to get in. Life in Denver settled into a rhythm I hadn't realized I craved. Mornings with crisp mountain air, coffee brewing before sunrise. Long days brainstorming with brilliant minds who didn't care where I came from, only what I had to offer. Promise was gaining traction. We'd been shortlisted for a regional startup grant. The pitch date loomed, but for the first time I wasn't nervous. I believed in the work. I believed in myself. The past wasn't behind me, not entirely, but it had loosened its grip. That is, until I saw Brad again. This time, he wasn't just passing through a shared workspace or offering awkward nods across the room. He walked straight up to me after a team review session, hands in his pockets, no swagger, no act. Just Brad stripped of pretense. "Hey," he said. "I don't want to push, but I meant what I said. I'd like to talk when you're ready." There was something about the way he stood, shoulders squared but not tense, voice calm but not rehearsed, that made me pause. I didn't owe him anything, and yet something told me he wasn't looking for absolution. Just a conversation. I nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, after lunch. There's a park 2 blocks east." He blinked, almost surprised I agreed. "I'll be there." The next day, we sat on a bench under a cluster of oaks, their leaves starting to shift to amber. Fall had a way of reminding you that nothing stays. Brad was holding a paper cup of coffee like it might break if he squeezed too hard. I didn't say anything at first. Let the silence build. He was the one who wanted this. "You know, I used to think you hated me," he began. "I did," I replied, honest. "But mostly because I thought you stole something from me." He nodded. "I know now I didn't. Not directly, anyway. But I let it happen. I benefited. And I never asked questions I should have asked. That's on me." I looked at him, really looked. The cocky grin, the entitled smirk that used to live on his face, gone. His eyes were clearer now. Older. "You were a kid too," I said. "But you had choices. You chose easy. I chose hard." "You chose right," he said quietly. And I didn't know how to face that without feeling like garbage. "Maybe that's because you were acting like garbage." He gave a dry laugh. "Fair." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind shuffle through the leaves. A squirrel darted past us. Somewhere a bike bell rang. "You know what the worst part was?" Brad asked. "It wasn't jail. It wasn't losing the business or watching Mom fall apart. It was realizing that everything I thought I was smart, special, destined was built on other people's sacrifices. Mostly yours. And I never even thanked you. Thanking me now doesn't erase it. I know, I'm not asking you to forget. I just wanted to be human enough to say I saw what I did or didn't do. And I'm sorry." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to snap at him, ask why it took a prison cell and a ruined name to find humility. But another part, the quieter part that had been rebuilding, just felt tired. Tired of holding grudges that had long lost their purpose. "I don't know if we'll ever be anything close to brothers," I said. "But I think I can stop being your ghost." He blinked, nodded. "That's enough." The days that followed weren't magical. No cinematic healing arcs, no sudden bonds, but the air felt different. Lighter. I caught Brad once helping an intern fix a busted code line without making a show of it. He was learning, trying. I didn't trust him, not fully, but I respected the effort. That was new. Meanwhile, promise kept growing. Our pitch got accepted for the State Innovation Summit. I was scheduled to speak in front of investors, educators, even a few state representatives. Greg called the night before. "You ready to make your old man proud again?" I smiled into the receiver. "Let's just hope I don't trip walking on stage." He chuckled. "Even if you do, they'll remember you. Just speak from the gut." That's your edge, Liam. You've lived this. Nobody in that room can fake what you've survived. He was right. I didn't use slides that day. Just stood on stage with Dad's notebook in my hand, the same one I carried through every phase of this journey. I spoke about broken systems, stolen futures, and the power of transparency. I spoke about a kid who watched his world collapse and built a new one from the rubble. I didn't name names, but I didn't need to. The message was clear: vulnerability can be a blueprint too. The applause hit like a wave. And after a man from the State Education Board approached me, eyes shining. "We need your platform in every high school in this district," he said. "How soon can we talk?" I shook his hand, heart racing. "Tomorrow." That night, I found a letter tucked under my apartment door. No stamp, handwritten. I opened it on the kitchen counter, still in my suit. "Liam, you may not realize it, but you're already changing lives. I sat in that crowd today and thought, this kid used to be my shadow. Now you're leading the light. I'll never stop regretting what I allowed to happen, what I didn't protect you from. But I'm learning now in the echoes of my mistakes. Thank you for giving me space to watch you rise." Ma, I stared at the letter for a long time. There was no return address, but I knew she must have seen the video online. Maybe someone told her where to find me. I wasn't angry, not anymore, just quiet. Tired in the way you are when something heavy finally sets down on solid ground. I folded the letter. Didn't cry, didn't burn it either. I placed it beside Dad's notebook in the drawer, two sides of a long, messy story. A month later, we launched the beta version of Promise. The first to sign up was a girl named Maya from a rough neighborhood in Cleveland. 17 top of her class parents barely spoke English. Her guidance counselor told her about us. She sent a message through the app on launch day. This just made me feel like college isn't a joke, like maybe it's real now. Thank you. I stared at that message for a long time, realizing this was the moment I'd waited for. Not revenge, not redemption, but resonance. Proof that something good could rise from something so painfully broken. That night, Brad emailed me a one-line update, got hired at a youth rehab center. Part-time mentoring. Thought you'd want to know. I stared at the screen, then typed back, "Good, stay there. Keep doing the work." No emoji, no warmth, but he'd know it was my version of a nod. Some stories don't end. They just keep rippling out through choices, consequences, and the quiet ways we show up better than we were. I wasn't chasing a happy ending anymore, just building a solid beginning, one brick at a time. I'd become my father's promise, and I was just getting started. It started raining the morning Promise officially partnered with the state education board. Not a violent storm, just a steady cleansing kind of rain. The kind that soaks the pavement and smells like something fresh is about to grow. I stood by my apartment window watching the drops trickle down the glass, feeling still for the first time in years. No weight in my chest, no fire in my gut, just the quiet presence of peace. That day we signed contracts with 5 districts. Schools from rural counties and inner-city neighborhoods would start rolling out our pilot in the fall. For a kid like I was stuck between grief and systems that don't listen, this program could be the bridge they needed. A lifeline. It wasn't just a project anymore, it was a legacy. I called Greg first. His voice was groggy, it was barely 7. "We did it," I said. A pause. "Then you damn right you did." He didn't say much after that, just listened while I talked. That's how Greg always supported me, not with speeches, but with silence that gave space for my own voice. When I hung up, I didn't feel the urge to tell anyone else. Not right away. But by noon, I found myself typing out a short message to my mom. "It's official. Promise is now live in 5 districts. Thought you'd want to know." I didn't expect a response. I wasn't even sure why I sent it. Maybe some small part of me wanted her to see it not as a guilt trip, but as a mile marker. A sign that despite everything, I'd made it. She replied 4 hours later, "I'm proud of you, Liam. Your dad would be too." That was it. No emotion layered in. No apology mixed in this time. Just the words I had once begged for when I was 15, angry and invisible. And oddly, they didn't land the way I expected. They didn't reopen a wound. They didn't bring tears. They just settled quietly into the space that had once ached and now simply existed. I didn't reply, but I saved the message. Not because it meant something profound, but because it felt enough. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a woman named Anita Shaw. She ran a foundation in Chicago that focused on education, access, financial literacy, and generational equity. She'd seen our platform in action during a school visit and wanted to collaborate, expand it, integrate it into statewide policy discussions, maybe even lobby for national adoption. "Your work could change how low-income students interact with financial aid forever," she said over the phone. "But we need your voice in those rooms, Liam." She invited me to speak at a National Youth Equity Summit. I said yes. I booked the ticket and didn't sleep for 2 nights straight. The morning of the event, as I adjusted the tie Greg had mailed me as a good luck charm, navy blue classic no frills. I stared at myself in the hotel mirror. Older, sharper, but still carrying the same dark eyes that used to scan bank account slips and wonder if there'd be enough for textbooks, rent, groceries. I whispered, "Let's go, Dad." Then I walked out the door. The stage was bigger than any I'd ever stood on. Over 800 people in the room, a sea of suits, notepads, youth advocates, journalists, school officials. My name flashed across the screen in big white letters, Liam Carter, founder of Promise. I breathed deep. Then deeper. And then, like I'd practiced in Greg's garage 100 times, I stepped up and let the story unfold, not as a sob tale, not as a victim's recounting, but as a case study in resilience. I told them about the boy who watched his family crumble over money, the kid who lived off part-time jobs and slept with a notebook clutched like armor. I spoke of betrayal not with bitterness, but with clarity, of truth with dignity, of justice not as revenge, but as restoration. And I ended with this: we can't fix everything for the next generation. But we can remove the blindfold. We can give them transparency options and, above all, the belief that their future shouldn't be a gamble. We can give them promise, literally and figuratively. The standing ovation was surreal. But I wasn't chasing applause. I was chasing momentum. That's what mattered. After the panel, Brad found me in the hallway outside the auditorium. I wasn't expecting him, hadn't told him I'd be there. He looked uncomfortable in a dress shirt, sleeves awkwardly rolled. Still, he walked with more assurance now, not arrogance, just groundedness. "That was incredible," he said. "Thanks," I replied. "Didn't know you were coming." "Anita's husband is my mentor at the rehab center," he said. "He made me come. Said I needed to hear what real accountability sounds like." I nodded. "Glad you did." There was a long pause. He looked down, scuffed his boot against the tile. I don't want anything, he said. Just to say it again. I'm sorry. Not for what I did, but for everything I didn't do when you needed someone. I looked at him. At the man who used to be a boy I resented more than anyone. And I realized something I hadn't quite accepted until that moment. I forgive you, I said. His head jerked up, eyes wide. Seriously? Yeah, but not for you. For me. He swallowed, nodded. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but it's not about deserve anymore. It's about release. We shook hands. Not as brothers, not even as friends. Just two people finally free of the web they were both tangled in for far too long. The following spring, I visited Dad's grave. I hadn't been there in nearly 6 years. The headstone was simple, weathered by time. Andrew Carter, 1965-2006. Loving husband, devoted father. I sat down on the grass, pulled out the old blue notebook I'd carried through every move, job, speech, and breakthrough. I kept the promise I said aloud, took a detour or two, but I got there, we got there. I smiled, tracing the faint indentation of his handwriting on the last page. My eyes drifted to the tree nearby, the same one from our old backyard photo that Greg gave me. Its branches were full now, leaves dancing in the breeze. I closed the notebook, rested my hand on the earth. Your investment paid off, Dad, with interest. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was talking to a memory. I felt like I was carrying forward a piece of him with every step, every word, every system we dared to rebuild. Years from now, when kids open Promise and see their own names next to an account balance they can trust, maybe they'll never know my name. That's okay, they won't need to. Because the point isn't for them to know my pain. The point is for them to never have to feel it. Let them build their future without the ghost of betrayal at their back. Let them walk toward the horizon, notebook in hand, not afraid but ready. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't a sharp word or a triumphant headline. Sometimes the best revenge on is becoming exactly who they said you couldn't, and doing it without losing your soul.